Shall we move on to our debate topic of the week? We had talked about, when Elder and I were first discussing this, we were talking about it being a conversation about the concept of historical accuracy, whitewashing, and abstraction of history and race in board games. This was something that we actually brought up a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Crusaders Thy Will Be Done, which is a game that very much abstracts the Crusades and sort of takes away the Crusades from the Crusades. But tell us a little, just take us into this conversation, Elder.
Yeah. Well, again, my intro into Euro games was Puerto Rico, which I love. And I played it, quite a bit. And at some point, it took a while, I guess, for like a year or so, this controversy about they're not meeples in the game. They're these little discs, but they represent workers in the game.
They're called, I think, colonists.
Colonists, yeah. Right? Popped up in the game, and it's this complaint that people have that they are colored brown.
Yep.
And that they're actually slaves, right?
They never outright say it in the rule book or anything, but if you know the history of Puerto Rico, there's nothing else they could
be.
Right.
Right, exactly. And so so that kind of started this conversation that's come up quite a bit over the years that I've had in the hobby, being, again, a lot of the gaming groups that I'm in, I'm one of the few black people that's there. And so, often, friends of mine, other players will ask me, like, are you offended by this? How do you feel about this? I think it's a complicated issue, and something that I think it's worthy of discussion, but I don't think I've come to a definitive kind of decision point or feeling about it. Like, again, I'm not, to answer the question, am I offended by the brown discs in Puerto Rico? Yeah. I'm not, right? I get that it's an abstraction. Do I feel that, excuse me, that the game designer or the game publisher has a responsibility to, kind of say what it is? And I do not. Games are entertainment, and I don't think that there is any personal responsibility. Can it be used as a teaching tool? Absolutely. Can it be used as a vehicle to have discussions about race or about slavery? Absolutely. And the impact, generationally and economically? Absolutely. I think it could be. But other than that, I think the conversation continues to go on. And so the most recent example of this was a thread. I know we've mentioned, our good friend, Jennifer Slickburn a couple times, and she posted something about there's some Africa game. I think. Did you see this post?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so there was some Africa game. It was based in Africa, and I think GMT was the publisher.
Yes. I did see this thread.
Yeah. And that was pretty interesting.
Scramble for Africa.
Yeah, Scramble for Africa.
And it was on the P500, which is their pre-order system.
Right.
And they ended up pulling it.
Yeah.
And it was about the colonization of Africa.
Yeah. And it's like, my feeling is I want to see the game. You know what I mean? I want the game to come out, because again, my take on it is that, each one of these instances, again, we are talking about games, which is a form of entertainment and fun. Typically, I think it is an opportunity, again, to have, first of all, the discussion at large, but definitely from an educational standpoint.
Yeah.
Like, I think some kids in the hood should sit down and play Scramble for Africa and kind of get that take on it through gameplay. I think that could be a valuable thing, but it's all contextual too, right? Because if you play that out and you are a kid in the hood and you play that game, you could be left without the right context. You could be left with like really nothing of value, right? It could just make you feel bad, right, or worse about your situation or about your history or your culture or whatever. But again, I think in the right context, it could be used, again, educationally and possibly as a source of empowerment.
Right. But I guess that comes down to who's the professor at the table, right? I mean, because if the game does none of that work for you, then I can, like, if you worked for GMT, right? If you were the head of GMT and you put this game out and you saw this going down, I mean, GMT released a statement and pulled the game and said that they agreed that they hadn't, that the game did not deal with the topic in the correct way, in a sensitive enough way, and they pulled the game. There's no statement yet if they are recontextualizing the game or, so like, if you were GMT and this sort of outcry started, how would you respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think they did the appropriate thing, right? Because here's where it gets dicey, right? Is when, again, as far as I know, there's no black board game companies or black board game publishers. There's also, as far as I know, very few. There are a few, but very few black board game designers. Yeah. Or game design. I know a lot more about the statistics in the media arts field, like in video games, than I know about board games. But like in video games, black people are less than 1% of the gaming industry. The video games are, of course, economically a much bigger business than board games. Although board games, we were talking about CMON.
CMON,
CMON. Like they're crushing it.
And most of their successful games are by Eric Lang, who's one of the more prominent African American designers.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, I think that's, I feel like I should know that, right? And I feel like,
Well, he's definitely when I go to a lot of board game conventions, and so does Eric Lang, and he is very often the only African American face at a lot of these conventions, not just as designers,
right,
but I mean,
but
as
just period
people showing up to the event.
Right.
And I mean, he, how does that feel? I mean, you go to a lot of conventions. I mean, there are not, I mean, especially a Strategicon or even Gen Con's probably the best of them because it's just the biggest. So you see more women there, you see more people of color.
Yeah.
But, I mean, why do you think that is?
I think, the bottom line, there's a lot of different answers for this, I think. But I think the bottom line is that when you're talking about, and again, I want to be really careful here, right? We're talking about a certain demographic, right? So it's not, you're not just talking about race, but I think you're also talking about economical status, right?
It is a leisure activity.
Exactly. And I think when you're talking about black people in the quote unquote hood, right? And again, I'm not going to pretend to know what the statistics are, average household income of African Americans and in what parts of the country or whatever. But again, when I'm right now focusing on like basically poor black people, right? Talk about South LA. They're worried about survival. And when you worry about survival, you're not thinking about, now this is interesting though, right? Because it doesn't really explain it. I was about to say you're not thinking about like playing board games, right? But, and I do know these statistically, right? In terms of video games, African Americans actually play video games more and typically spend more on video games and video game consoles than any other race.
Wow.
And so why not board games? I'm not really sure. I would say it's definitely cultural.
Yeah.
Right. But why? It's almost like why, can we explain why family games are so prevalent in Germany as opposed to here? You know? I'm not really sure, but it's a very kind of interesting social question, you know.
Well, I mean, in terms of like conventions and like events like that and stuff, I know having spoken to a lot of women who come to these events, like a lot of them are just like, like, well, there's just a lot of dudes there. Like,
Yeah.
So it's like, it's like, you know, it does not super welcoming. So it's sort of a little bit of like, you know, a double-edged sword thing. Cause like until more women come, more women won't come.
Right.
But more women aren't coming because more women are like, do you think there's the same thing happening with people of color coming to conventions?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there. I think that again, in terms of culture, so there's another interesting thing, particularly in LA, right? Again, we, you know, typically go to Strategicon, which is this big, you know, 3-4 day event.
Yeah, by the
that
airport.
Always happens on a holiday weekend.
Right.
Typically, what and again, I'm almost afraid to sound stereotypical here, but typically, what Black people are doing on a holiday weekend is they're going to the movies, going to cookouts, kind of doing things like that. They're not typically in a hotel convention
Hilton.
room, right? Playing board games
in a
right?
basement,
and spending money to be, because again, it's what is like $50-$60 or whatever.
$60 for the weekend.
Yeah, so it's just not one, and it sticks out to me because a lot of younger Black people from across the country come out to LA on some of those holiday weekends because there's like big parties and events that are culturally relevant, that they're coming to the same hotel. And it's funny because I'll be at the con and I'll see some young Black folks that are staying in the hotel for an event, and they'll walk by and they'll be like, what the heck is going on here with these guys with these little toys running around, you know? So it's interesting. And again, I don't really have an answer other than it's just not culturally relevant. And a part of me wishes that it was. I feel like, this conversation, I was on a panel actually up at Comic-Con last week, and it was actually an Afrofuturist panel. And one of the panelists made a really strong point, which I totally agree with, about the lack of system design in the Black community. And that there's almost like there's almost an aversion to it.
What does that mean exactly?
In that, one of the things that I got excited when I started educating people and training people in the art of game design, one thing that I got is that basically any business you can break down into a game system. Right. And so what the panelist was pointing to was that a lot of why many African Americans are unsuccessful in business or in entrepreneurship is that they don't understand the system of how businesses, like the full picture.
Yeah.
Right. Very, typically very creative. Have lots of ideas, lots of talent, but in terms of, we pointed to franchises like McDonald's or Starbucks,
right?
As classic examples of kind of like, American, capitalist, business structures, right? And that there's this kind of lack of understanding, and that if that understanding was there, it might make a really big difference for the economic potential of Black people in this country, right? Mm-hmm. And again, I kind of feel like, there's, there's this subconscious aversion to it, of being systemized, of even selling. Right. Just because of where we come from, our history, and just not wanting to be involved with anything that has to do with that.
Right. Just like as if the capitalistic process in and of itself was innately tainted.
Exactly. Yeah. For us. Which it was.
Yeah,
but again, I feel like this is kind of in the background it's not like a conscious thing, right?
Yep.
It's almost like people joke about Black people not wanting to swim or having an aversion to going on boat trips, Right. I think there's something to that. You know, it's there's been scientific studies that have proven that certain trauma is genetic.
Mm-hmm.
It's in our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I feel like it's a particular issue here because when you look at other places in the world, it's not. There's other issues, but it's not exactly the same type of psyche, and I think it all kind of fits in. So I'm very interested and looking forward. I'm very interested in, and I'm already doing projects like this.
Yeah.
I just actually there's a nonprofit called Educating Young Minds, which mostly caters to children who happen to be African immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing like a game design workshop there. And
Right.
I've done stuff like that in the community. And I'm always actively interested in getting, young Black and brown kids into the hobby of board games and also interested in game design if they want to do that. Especially again, because it also fits in with the whole interest, again, video games being the biggest market.
Yeah.
Is like, how are we going to get more diversity in that industry? Well, it's got to happen on the education side and the training side, and young people actually have to see themselves as potential game designers.
Yeah.
Again, the gentleman you mentioned, what's his name again?
Eric M. Lang. Yeah.
Yeah.
He designed Rising Sun and what's the one that we used to play all the time? Blood. No.
Oh yeah, Blood Rage.
Blood Rage. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think I think a lot of times, young people don't see that as a possible career for themselves because they don't see people that look like them. It goes back to kind of what you were saying, where like, yeah, if you don't see yourself represented in a certain area, a certain group, you don't just right off the bat feel like you're welcome or that it's for you, and so you're not going to gravitate towards it.
Sure. Yeah. When you were talking about African American board game publishers, I was trying to remember because I remember seeing instantly on Twitter and Instagram this, and I found it when I was looking at it. It's called, there's two brothers who have a place called Board Game Brothers, and they, Fahamu and Omari Dennis, and they are in New Orleans, and they have a game coming out this year called Rap Gods. But they were, I remember reading an article recently about two African Americans who started their own board game company, and there was a cool article in Vice about it.
Yeah.
But so in research of this, I was actually looking at a handful of games that sort of dealt with race in either more upfront ways or sort of like, so for example, Freedom, the Underground Railroad I was looking at.
Yep.
It's a cooperative game about the Underground Railroad, which is very much a game, but also a teaching tool.
Yeah.
And I think to make it effective, it seems to me like doing both is ideal.
Yeah, I played the game once.
Yeah.
Don't feel the need to play it again.
Did it feel more like a teaching tool than a game you'd want to bring to the table?
Yeah, kind of edutainment is a really tricky thing. I think if it just kind of feels like it takes the fun out of it, especially when you're dealing with a really heavy theme.
Right. Not exactly what you want to sit down and do it for your downtime. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually before that game came out, I was actually working on my own Harriet Tubman roadway to it wasn't road, it was Underground Railroad strategy game or something like that, because I actually think, again, in terms of system design, right, it's actually a really interesting topic, and Harriet Tubman, who's I just saw a trailer, they're doing a Harriet Tubman feature film that's coming out, so I'm curious to see what happens with that. But it's a if you know or anything about her story in detail, it's fascinating, and I don't know, like, that's a really cool theme for a game. Yeah. If it's done right. And again, I just think it's always tricky trying to make something, I guess, historically accurate, or trying to teach you something and then having it be a really fun game at the same time. Yeah. And then again, that factor we talked about how heavy is the theme, and is that something that you really want to play? Yeah.
Well, it's a funny thing because Board Game Geek, for the most part, is, I think, one of the least toxic places on the internet.
Yeah.
In terms of internet toxicity, it's pretty good.
I agree.
That being said, anytime there is a topic about race in board games or anything like that, you get a large contingent, a near majority, who do this classic sort of, oh, we're so sensitive, it's just a game, get over it. And then there's a portion of that as well that starts going, censorship. Like, well, first of all, neither of those things are happening. It's not censorship.
Right.
This is it's not illegal to make a game with slaves in it. Yeah. You're not going to jail for it. And the market will do what the market will do naturally on its own, which is either reward the game or not. Or in the case of something like GMT, they make a company-wide decision to go, we hear you. We're going to go ahead and back off. We're not going to put this game out. Yeah. And that's not censorship.
Right.
That's personal choice in a privately owned company. Right. But I mean, to me, it definitely like is an interesting thing. I really enjoy the game Mombasa by Alexander Pfister. Yeah. On a mechanical level, I adore the game. Yeah. I sure wish it was a different theme because the theme it's just unnecessary. It's we're divvying up Africa for its diamonds. Yep. And it sucks. I remember the first time I learned the game, I was like, why couldn't this be like sci-fi? It's just, you feel like a bunch of white dudes sitting around a table divvying up Africa is not a dope look. It's not a good feeling.
The optics are not good.
No, it's just, and you're all just sitting there this is a cool, the mechanics, I love Alexander Pfister. He's my dude. His games are my jam. Yeah. I would love someone to retheme it because it's just, and the fact that it doesn't, it's just, there it is. I don't know. It just seems like, why not? That wasn't a necessary, I don't know. It's just, it's a tough thing. It's just not, or even like Five Tribes, right? Basically, Five Tribes is an abstract game, but there's slave cards in the game. Why?
Yeah.
It's why? And then of course that was a huge controversy.
And they're colored brown.
They are brown, and there are slave cards, and the company Days of Wonder now took them out and put in fakirs, I think is what they called them instead. Yeah. With snake charmers or something, I think. Right. Yeah. But it's and then you get all these people in the geek going well, I'm sorry, slaves exist. Well, I'm like, but why do they have to be in this abstract game that has nothing to do with history? Right. I mean, why not put rape in it? It doesn't, it's totally unnecessary addition to an abstract game that has nothing to do. It takes place in the Knights of the Arabian fantasy world. It's not even history.
Right. And here's where the diversity on the design side comes in, right?
Because it didn't even occur to them.
Exactly. It didn't occur to, there were so many people involved in the publishing of that game, and it's a great game. Yeah. And honestly, I remember when the game came out, that was one of the years that I was just thrilled and privileged to be able to go to Gen Con. And I played the heck out of the game, and I didn't even notice it. It really took.
I probably didn't either my first turn. Yeah.
Right. It took somebody to point it out to me. Right. Yeah. Now, if I was in the production of the game, though, I think I probably would have noticed, and I think I probably would have said something about it. Right. Right. But again, that's one of those things. If you don't have a black or brown person on your team, whether it be the design team, the publishing team, marketing, somewhere in the process, it just, again, there's no guarantee that the decision is going to get made or not, but maybe there's more of a chance that it will. You know?
That does seem to be the key. It's really just about not having all white dudes in every realm of game design. Yeah. So let's see.
And also, I really feel strongly that what kind of girl, what would it be like to have a team of talented black female game designers, and what kind of game would they come up with? I just think there's a lot of kind of ideas and design sensibilities that would create something that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah. Well, Jennifer Schlickburn might be one of the few. I mean, she worked on Advanced Civilization.
Exactly.
I just wanted to briefly bring up, because there is a famous sort of game in, I don't know if you've ever heard about this, but there is a board game that was done as sort of an art piece a few years back. This was in 2013, and it is a strategy game for a bunch of people, and your job is to stack as many people into a train as possible. And the winner is the person who gets the most people in the train. And then at the very end of the game, a card is drawn to reveal where the trains are going, and they're all heading to different concentration camps.
Yeah.
In probably 1937 or something.
Yep.
And so it was a game about how we often, or historically, how people can do horrible things, but we're taking advantage of sort of their ant brain that likes to work and do things efficiently and do things well. And how that, working as a group and working together to solve a problem is a human thing, but that can often be used for atrocities.
Yeah.
I
you happen to know who the designer was?
Yes, Brenda Romero.
Yes.
Brenda Romero is the designer on that. The game was called Train.
Yep. Yeah, she's amazing. I'm sure there's a few of her talks on YouTube. Really just a amazing individual, very passionate. It's funny that you bring this up, because I was actually just sharing about this, I think with my wife the other day. That was actually just one of her kind of socially conscious games that she created. So actually the first one that she designed, she was, I believe, married to an African American man, and so she has a mixed child, right? And she tells a story about how her child went to school, and she was talking with her afterwards, and she said, what did you learn in school today? And she was like, oh, Mom, we learned about how black people, slavery, and how black people came over on a boat ride. Right? Like kind of like a yacht, right? Like boat it was ride. Like, yeah. Right. And she was like, what? Like, what are they telling you? Right. And so again, as she does with kind of like dealing with issues, she basically, said, okay, I'm going to show you how it really went down. And she got some meeples, some wooden meeples, and like those styrofoam containers that meat come in. She got some of those and started lining up the meeples in these trays. Right. And then she's like, okay, you got to like put some of them out in the water. You just got to put them. And she was like, but Mom, you don't want to do that. They're going to drown, And she's like, no, well, that's the game, honey. Right. And, kind of like harsh, you know, but, like a kind of like gamified or game design way to kind of like throw, some reality onto how, this young person probably learned about, slavery when they were in grade school. Right. Yeah. So again, going back to this whole idea of these kind of controversial themes, can be used as teaching tools, and it's all about kind of context. And at the end of the day, it's all about choices too. You know? And I just got to say too, going back to the GMT issue, I feel like they made the right call. I mean, I feel like, we could go into, which I don't want to, a whole thing about like today's environment, just around race and politics and everything. But really in any era, I think it is problematic to put that game out. Right. And almost it doesn't feel right, but I kind of feel like if the company was black owned and it was black designers, it would be different contextually.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So. And I think the fact that the designer, I think at the time, didn't really even realize that would be an issue, you know? But yeah, and also timing is, there's definitely, I can't say there's always a good time to release that game, but there's definitely a bad time to release that game. And I think we're living in it.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I'm glad we could bring that up. Definitely I can't think of something better to talk about in our debate section than race and the appropriate ways to deal with actual historical atrocities in an entertainment world. And as wonderful as I imagine Train is as a work of art, I'm not bringing it to the table anytime soon.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure it's a wonderful experience.
Right.
For people who aren't familiar with the Holocaust.